Imagine this. Some spoiled, entitled jerk struts into your home, your sanctuary, like he owns the place. Then, with zero shame, he has the audacity to declare he's taking your wife for a few nights. Let that sink in. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he doesn't stop there. Nope. He starts throwing threats your way just to really drive the point home. Now, my gut reaction? I wanted to flatten him right there, wipe that smug grin off his face with a solid punch. But I held back. Something in me decided to go a different route. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking because, honestly, I was already having a lousy day. That Thursday had been brutal. I just finished packing tools into my pickup after another long grind on a staircase project that was driving me up the wall. For 2 weeks, I'd been dealing with this nitpicky client who couldn't make up his mind. Every time I thought we had the design locked down, he'd change his mind again. Just that morning, he hit me with such a massive revision that I had to dismantle a chunk of the work I'd already done. To make things worse, the changes were big enough that I'd need to sit down with the architect and engineer to redraw the plans. So yeah, my Friday, which I'd hoped would be smooth, was now wide open for unexpected chaos. A mixed blessing, I suppose. Anyway, let me introduce myself. I'm Ethan Walker, 34, a craftsman and owner of a boutique carpentry business. My specialty? High-end, custom staircases that double as works of art. My clients are the big shots. Mansion owners, luxury hotels, upscale restaurants, you name it. They don't blink at dropping $50,000 or more for something unique. I've been married to Lillian Brooks for 4 years. She's 29 and an attorney specializing in commercial and intellectual property law. Lillian's smart, driven, and laser-focused on her career. She's been climbing the ranks at Reed, Bowen, and Hendrick, her firm, which is part of why we haven't started a family yet. She wanted to get her footing in the corporate world first. That day, I got home around 4:30 p.m., sweaty and drained from the job site. The first thing that threw me off? Lillian's car was already in the driveway. It was weird because Thursdays were her late nights. She usually stayed at the office to get ahead of her workload before the weekend. Curious, I headed in through the back door, my usual route after work. I noticed the water pressure was lower than usual. A small thing, but it caught my attention. Was Lillian upstairs in the shower? That was odd too, since she usually showered in the morning or before bed. After changing into something comfortable, I made my way upstairs to see what was up. Sure enough, Lillian had just finished her shower. She was standing there, getting ready. But here's the kicker. She wasn't in her usual casual attire. She was dressed to kill. Black fishnet stockings. A sleek, brand new black dress laid out neatly on the bed. Her hair wasn't just done. It was styled, polished, like she'd put real thought into it. "Hey, honey," I said, trying to sound casual, even though something felt off. "What's the occasion? Am I forgetting something? Did we have plans tonight?" She turned to face me, but her expression was off, nervous. She was clearly trying to keep it together, but I could tell something was up. Finally, after letting out a sigh, she said, "No, Ethan, you didn't forget anything," and that's when the tension in the room hit me like a freight train. "I'm going out tonight, Ethan," Lillian said flatly as she zipped up her sleek black dress. "And you're not. I'll be back Sunday afternoon. I'm spending the weekend with Nathan Reed." I froze, certain I'd misheard her. "What are you talking about? Is this some kind of work trip?" I asked, my voice edged with confusion. "No," she replied, her tone calm and cold. "It's not work. Nathan booked a suite for us. I'll see you next week. This weekend is for him." Her words landed like a brick to the chest. "You've got to be kidding me, Lillian. You can't seriously think you're just going to waltz out of here with some guy for the weekend. What the hell is going on?" Her expression hardened, and her voice dropped to an icy tone. "You'd better get used to it, Ethan, because that's how Nathan wants it. And trust me, you don't want to get on his bad side." I stared at her, disbelief flooding my veins. "Wait, let me get this straight. You're just leaving me here, expecting me to suck it up like nothing's wrong? And then what? Next week, we just pretend this never happened?" She gave me a sly, almost mocking smile. "I never said it was just for this weekend. Nathan mentioned this could be a regular thing. You'll just have to accept it. It'll be easier for you if you do. Anger flared in my chest. Lillian, you'd better think this through. If you think I'm gonna let some smug prick run my life and treat me like a doormat, you're out of your mind. She ignored me entirely, focusing on the final touches of her look as if we weren't even having this conversation. Furious, I stormed downstairs, grabbed a beer, and tried to calm the raging storm in my head. Minutes later, the sound of tires crunching the gravel outside pulled my attention. A shiny black Mercedes pulled up in front of the house, and out stepped the man himself, Nathan Reed. This wasn't my first time dealing with him. We'd crossed paths a couple of years ago at a holiday party Lillian's firm hosted. He was the textbook definition of a power player. Mid-40s, sharp-dressed, smooth-talking, and absolutely dripping with arrogance. He had a way of charming the women while treating every man in the room like they were beneath him. I hated the guy from the moment I saw him. Lillian came downstairs, clearly irritated, and opened the door for him. "Sorry for the wait, Nathan," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "My husband seems to have forgotten his manners." Her tone, so submissive, was a jarring contrast to how she normally spoke to me. She muttered something under her breath, too quiet for me to catch, as Nathan swaggered into my house like he owned the place. Well, dusty boy," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I hear you've got a problem with Lillian spending the weekend with me." He didn't even stop at the door. He just strutted into my living room. My blood was boiling at this point. "Listen," I snapped, fists clenched at my sides. "You've got 5 seconds to get out of my house before I call the cops." He laughed, a deep, mocking laugh, and glanced at Lillian, who smirked behind him. "Call the cops," he sneered. "Go ahead. Let's see what they do." Spoiler alert. Nothing? Then his sharp eyes zeroed in on my chest. "Wait a second. Are you recording me?" he asked, his smirk fading as he spotted the edge of my phone peeking out of my shirt pocket. Before I could say a word, Nathan snatched the phone from my pocket. His smug grin only widened when he saw the screen was password locked. Without hesitation, he hurled it onto the floor. The ceramic tiles won that battle, leaving the screen shattered in a spiderweb of cracks. "Listen closely, you little nobody," he said, his tone dropping to a menacing growl. "Your wife is spending the weekend with me, whether you like it or not. In fact, she'll be with me whenever I please. Let me make this crystal clear. Your opinions in this matter? They're utterly irrelevant. Do you understand me?" I stared at him, seething, but he didn't give me a chance to respond. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating, and continued, "If you dare to interfere, the repercussions will be severe. Your life, already bleak as it is, will become an unbearable nightmare compared to what I'm capable of unleashing. So do yourself a favor and stay quiet this weekend. Don't stir up trouble." His words were venomous, and before I could even fully process them, he dropped a bombshell. "And let's make this part perfectly clear. If I catch even a whisper of you upsetting Lillian, threatening her with divorce, or pulling some foolish stunt like contacting my wife, you'll regret it. Everyone will learn about your little escapades, the money laundering, or the unspeakable materials on your computer." "Yes, I know all about it." I froze. My mind raced as I tried to process his accusations. I had never, not once, engaged in money laundering, and the idea that I'd have anything so vile as illegal content on my computer? It was absurd. He smirked, leaning in as if delivering the punchline to some sick joke. Of course, I chose to let it slide, feigned ignorance, if you will. But it's a precarious situation, isn't it? One word from me, and your reputation is ruined. My reply was calculated, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "That's easily arranged," I said flatly, trying to appear unaffected. Uploading material to someone's computer isn't exactly rocket science. A few clicks, and anyone's reputation could be destroyed. I paused, feigning thoughtfulness. "But wouldn't that incriminate you too? If those materials are illegal, wouldn't possessing them already be a crime?" I made my tone light, almost as if I were discussing the weather. not trading barbs with a man threatening to destroy my life. Nathan's smirk deepened, his arrogance practically oozing from him. That's the difference between you and me, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. What's illegal for someone like you is perfectly acceptable for people like me. People with influence, power, connections. So my advice? Stick to your quaint little working-class values and leave the business of the elite to those of us who know how to play the game. Are we clear? The absurdity of his words was staggering. It felt like I'd been dropped into a bad crime drama, the kind with over-the-top villains and laughable dialogue. Yet, standing in my living room, Nathan was deadly serious. As if he hadn't already twisted the knife enough, he added one last jab before leaving. Oh, and don't even think about retaliating against me or Lillian. That includes seeking comfort in someone else's arms. His smirk turned cruel. Wouldn't want you catching something and passing it on to Lillian and, by extension, to me. Understood? In fact, I'll ask Lillian to deny you closeness for now. See? I'm being quite reasonable. With that, he turned on his heel, gesturing toward the door like he owned the place. His confidence was sickening. And the worst part? Lillian was just standing there, complicit, not saying a word. Lillian grabbed her overnight bag and walked out the door without so much as a glance in my direction. No goodbye. No acknowledgement. Nothing. It was as if I didn't even exist. Then, Nathan had the gall to call her honey as they left. A term of endearment that felt like acid dripping into an open wound. The whole thing was so surreal it left me frozen. Not just angry but utterly stunned. My emotions were a chaotic swirl of fury and disbelief. How had it come to this? And then, amidst the storm of feelings, I remembered something. A small stroke of luck buried in the nightmare. A year before I met Lillian, a burglar broke into my house. That incident had prompted me to install a comprehensive surveillance system. Motion-activated cameras, voice recording microphones, everything synced to a secure cloud. What Lillian never knew, and what I'd kept to myself, was that the system could be activated even when we were home. She'd assumed it was for when the house was empty, and I never corrected her. Before she opened the door for that detestable man, I'd quietly activated it. At the same time, I started recording on my cell phone, a deliberate decoy. I hoped Reed would spot it, assume he'd disabled the only recording device, and let his guard down. The plan worked better than I could have imagined. The cell phone now lying shattered on the floor? That had been its purpose all along. Luckily, it wasn't even my personal phone. It was my business phone, something I kept separate for work. I'd adopted the habit of carrying two phones after learning wealthy clients expected 24/7 availability. Having a business phone let me set boundaries. I could turn it off at night and deal with messages in the morning. With that plan in motion, I picked up my personal phone and called Victor Hayes, my business lawyer and someone I trusted like family. Victor wasn't just my attorney, he was my brother-in-law, though in a roundabout way. He'd married my oldest sister, Abigail, 10 years ago. Their happiness had been tragically short-lived, though. Abigail drowned while on vacation in Guadeloupe with friends. Even after losing her, Victor stayed close to our family, and 3 years later, he found love again with Sophia. They married a year after they met, and Lillian and I had attended their wedding with my parents. To this day, Victor and Sophia felt more like siblings than in-laws. When I explained what had just happened, Nathan's threats, Lillian's betrayal, and the disturbing events leading up to their weekend getaway, Victor didn't hesitate. His calm, decisive tone cut through my panic like a lifeline. Stay indoors, he instructed. Turn off all your communication devices, and don't contact anyone. Sophia and I will be there in an hour, and we'll bring dinner. I hung up, already feeling a bit steadier. Victor's confidence was contagious, and his presence had always given me a sense of security. As I waited, I found myself reflecting on the last hour, replaying it in my mind. The truth hit me hard. Lillian had been drawn to Nathan's power and charm, trading what we'd built for his influence. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Our bond was far weaker than I'd thought. I thought back to how it all began, 5 years earlier. It had been at a friend's birthday party. Lillian had been a stranger to me then, the younger sister of the birthday boy. Lillian and I had met through a mutual connection, an old army buddy I'd been stationed with in Afghanistan. He'd introduced us at his birthday party, and we'd hit it off right away. What started as a casual connection blossomed into a whirlwind week of dating and, a year later, marriage. Back then, I was still finding my footing. I worked for Mr. Craig Harris, a skilled woodworker who ran a small business crafting custom furniture and other high-end pieces. While Harris was a wizard with his hands, his accounting and management skills were another story. He'd brought me on part-time during college to help him with his bookkeeping. It didn't take long for things to pick up. Within months, Harris landed 3 major contracts. More work than he could possibly handle alone. When he asked if I'd step in to help on the job site, I didn't hesitate. At first, my tasks were basic. Running errands, picking up supplies, helping with heavy lifting. But it didn't take long for my quick learning and enthusiasm for the craft to shine through. Once I got over the initial learning curve, I started taking on simpler projects independently and eventually became a critical part of the team for more complex jobs. Even though I earned my accounting degree, I found myself falling in love with the hands-on work. The satisfaction of creating something tangible, something lasting, was unmatched. I decided to pursue an apprenticeship, and after several years of dedication, I earned my certification and officially became Harris's business partner. When Harris retired, my parents stepped in with financial support, allowing me to buy out his share of the business over 2 years. It wasn't an easy transition, but I focused on quality over quantity, taking on fewer but more lucrative projects. While some of Lillian's lawyer friends at CBH sneered at me as a blue-collar shop worker, I didn't let it bother me. My business was thriving. In fact, I'd recently hired 2 assistants and was bringing in more income than many of the attorneys in Lillian's circle. The irony? She had no clue how successful I'd become. I didn't flaunt it, but it stung that she seemed oblivious to my accomplishments. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. Victor and Sophia had arrived, carrying bags of Chinese takeout and a 6-pack of beer. "Ethan, are you okay?" Sophia asked as she pulled me into a warm hug. Her concern was genuine, her voice soft and comforting. "I can't believe Lillian did this to you. It's not like her." Victor stepped in next, giving me a firm, grounding embrace. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll figure this out together," he said, his calm presence a relief. "Let's eat first. Then we'll look at that recording." Over dinner, I recounted everything. Nathan's threats, Lillian's cold indifference, and the humiliating reception I'd been met with that afternoon. Victor listened intently, his expression growing darker with every detail. When we finished eating, I retrieved my laptop and pulled up the files from the surveillance system. The video and audio recordings were crystal clear, catching every arrogant word Nathan had spewed. Victor's jaw tightened as he listened, his hands gripping the table. "I can't believe what I just heard," he said, shaking his head. "What an arrogant piece of work," I muttered, my voice laced with dry contempt. "Arrogant?" Victor shot back, his tone sharp. "More like a complete idiot," Sophia chimed in, her eyebrows raised. "He really thinks he's untouchable, doesn't he?" Victor leaned back, crossing his arms. "This guy's what? 40? 42? With over a decade of legal experience under his belt. You'd think he'd know better than to say this garbage out loud, let alone in someone else's home." His words hung in the air, a stark reminder that, despite Nathan's bravado, he'd made a colossal mistake, and we were about to capitalize on it. "Maybe 15 years, Victor continued, leaning back thoughtfully. "He's not some novice, but his ego blinds him. He's so puffed up with self-importance that it never even occurred to him that sometimes keeping your mouth shut is the best strategy. And that decoy with your phone? Brilliant. Completely disarmed him. He let his guard down and gave us exactly what we needed." "That's great," I replied, "but can I even use this? I mean, I recorded it without his consent." Victor smiled, his confidence reassuring. "You're in the clear," he said. "This is your home, your private property. You're well within your rights to record anything that happens here. There's no legal risk in that regard." I wasn't convinced. "Okay, but you sighed earlier like there's still a catch," I pressed. Victor exhaled slowly. You're legally solid, yes, but we still need to tread carefully. On the way here, I did a little digging while Sophia drove. Turns out Nathan Reed isn't just another lawyer. He's the son of Albert Reed. You knew this, right? I nodded. Yeah, Lillian mentioned it when she started at CBH. Victor gave a knowing look. What you might not know is how Albert built his career. He wasn't particularly sharp as a lawyer, but he had friends in all the right places. Most of the local judges back then were his college buddies. That network gave him an edge in nearly every case he handled. And now Nathan is running the same playbook. That's what makes him so dangerous. He has influence in the courtroom that could tip the scales, even if the case against him is strong. So, you're telling me I'm doomed no matter what I do? I asked, frustration building. Victor shook his head firmly. Not doomed. It's going to be an uphill battle, but you've got me, and my network, on your side. The key is to gather ironclad evidence. We need to lock this down before he has a chance to react. But you just said the judges will side with him, I pointed out, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down. They will if we stick to civil court, Victor explained. But we're not. Our goal is to aim for criminal charges. That's where this whole game changes. Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Standing on the porch was a petite brunette holding a small bag. Mr. Walker? She asked politely. Emily, come on in. Victor called out, motioning her inside. Ethan, this is Emily Harper. She's a computer expert from a private investigation firm I work with regularly. I reached out to her after we talked earlier. Emily stepped into the room, her movements purposeful and her demeanor professional. She listened attentively as I recapped Nathan's threats, paying particular attention to his claim about planting incriminating material on my computer. When I played the recording for her, her expression darkened. Here's the deal, Emily said, her voice calm but firm. We're looking at two possible methods Nathan might use. The first, and more likely, scenario involves him physically accessing your computer. He'd alter the timestamps on the files to make it look like they were created or downloaded by you. She paused, glancing at Victor, who gave her a nod to continue. That kind of manipulation is harder to prove if he's careful, but not impossible to detect. I can examine your system for signs of tampering. The second method, though less common, involves remote access. He could try to hack into your system to plant the files that way. It's riskier for him, but if he's overconfident, he might go for it. I frowned. Is there a way to protect my computer against this? There is, Emily assured me. But first, I need to do a full sweep of your system to make sure nothing's been planted already. Then we'll fortify your devices to prevent any future attempts. If he tries anything, we'll know. And we'll be ready to strike back. Her confidence gave me a glimmer of hope. For the first time all day, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could fight back against Nathan Reed. Before his visit, if that happens, your surveillance system should capture everything. Just make sure the cameras are recording before you leave the house. She pulled out a sleek gray device from her bag. The second option is remote access. This module will monitor all activity on your network and record any attempts to upload or download files. To protect yourself, transfer all your personal and sensitive data to an external drive and wipe your computer clean. I'll help you do this, just to make sure nothing important is left behind. Her confidence was reassuring. It was clear she knew her stuff. Victor spoke up, let's get moving. Right now, the only solid proof we've got is the recording. If you try to take legal action with just that, the case could get dismissed, especially with Reed's connections. Public opinion tends to downplay blackmail, and his friendly judges could easily ignore it. But what if he goes ahead and uploads illegal content to your computer? That would change everything. Think about it, he continued. If he reports you for possession of illegal materials, we'd have a clear timeline showing it was planted, thanks to the warning he gave you, which we've already recorded. We'd have a bulletproof case in criminal court. Even his judicial buddies would have to back off. No one wants to be linked to exploitation. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of hope. If Reed was foolish enough to follow through with this, we'd be ready. This is sick and disturbing, I muttered, shaking my head. Yeah, but Reed's just as twisted as they come, Victor replied grimly. One more thing, he added. Can you avoid using your computer for the next few days? If Reed goes ahead and involves the police, they'll likely check your computer for any sign that someone accessed the illegal files after the upload. If you don't use it at all, the logs will stay clean, and that'll work in our favor. Also, make sure your phone doesn't connect to your home Wi-Fi. He might try to use that instead of your computer for his plan. Emily worked quickly, installing the surveillance module and erasing all sensitive data from both my computer and phone, including important company documents. The module will record and send us copies of any attempts to access your network, she explained. I'll keep you both updated once I've got something. Best of luck, gentlemen, she added before leaving. Victor turned back to me. All right, let's take care of the practical stuff. Do you want to start the divorce proceedings now? Or would you prefer to wait and see if Reed makes his next move? Is there any chance of working things out when Leland returns? No, I said, my voice sharp and unwavering. I want the divorce now. There's no reason to stay married to someone who's so easily manipulated by a self-important egomaniac. I've made my decision. It's over. Victor didn't hesitate, nodding firmly. Understood. I'll get in touch with Sylvia Grant first thing tomorrow. She's the best we have, and she'll make sure this is handled quickly and properly. Good, I muttered, feeling a small sense of relief. I knew this was the right move, even though the weight of it still felt suffocating. Victor reassured me that Sylvia would be in contact soon and that both she and he were professionals who knew how to handle situations like this. After a few more practical details, I gave him the access code to my surveillance system for real-time updates and cloud storage of recordings. By the time Victor and Sophia left, it was well past 11 p.m. I took a sleeping pill, desperate to shut off my racing thoughts, and I fell asleep in under 30 minutes. The next morning, at 8:30 a.m., Sylvia called. She was already briefed by Victor and was fully up to speed on my situation. She asked me to come in at 11 a.m. and I agreed, anything to start moving this forward. In her office, Sylvia wasted no time getting straight to the point. She expressed sympathy, but her tone was matter-of-fact. Given that you bought the house before you married Leland and her name isn't on the deed, that property is yours. No complications there. And with no kids, the divorce should be fairly simple. A part of me wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, but I couldn't quite shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. What about my business? Could she force me to sell it? Split the proceeds? My voice betrayed my anxiety. Sylvia didn't flinch. She immediately called Victor into the room. He entered with that same calm demeanor. Relax, Ethan, he said, his words like a steady anchor. Your marriage contract is ironclad. The company is yours. Leland can't touch it. They might try to challenge it, but legally they don't have a leg to stand on. For the first time that day, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. A glimmer of relief, but it was fleeting. There was still so much to deal with. By 12:30 p.m., the meeting wrapped up. Sylvia outlined how to handle the financial aspects of the divorce, assuring me that Leland would be served the papers at her office on Monday. After replacing my broken phone, I spent the rest of the weekend lost in mundane tasks. Working in the yard, trying to distract myself with TV shows I hadn't watched in ages. But despite the distractions, the anger toward Leland burned through me, searing every thought. I couldn't grasp the finality of it all. Our marriage was disintegrating, and part of me was numb, while another part seethed with a growing sense of betrayal. As Sunday evening approached, the tension built. Should I sleep in the guest room, or should I make Leland take it? The idea of being in the same space as her felt suffocating, but the thought of confronting her was almost worse. Ultimately, I made the decision. This was my house, and since she had walked out on me, I wasn't about to share my bed with her. I moved every single one of her things into the guest room and installed a lockable doorknob on my bedroom door, keeping the key firmly in my pocket. When I heard Reed's car pull into the driveway that evening, my blood went cold. I activated the surveillance system from the living room and watched with growing disgust as Leland and Reed exchanged a drawn-out kiss before she stepped out of the car. She waved as he drove off, then entered the house. I sat there, stiff and unmoving, pretending to read a book, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice forced, too cheerful to be real. "How was your weekend?" Without looking up, I replied in the most flat, indifferent tone I could muster. "Fine." Her smile wavered for just a second. Then she recovered. "Oh, great." Continue sulking, then. "Nathan warned me you'd act like this. So predictable. You lack the intelligence to understand my needs, and the maturity to face your own failures." Her mask slipped then, the venom in her words clear as day. With a hateful glare, she stormed up the stairs. I counted to myself, trying to keep my temper in check. 1, 2, 3. Then I heard it. "Ethan Walker." Her shriek echoed from the top of the stairs. "Did you put a lock on our bedroom?" I didn't raise my voice, but I made sure it was ice cold as I called back. "Correction. On my bedroom. Your things are in the guest room. That's where you'll stay until you find somewhere else." "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "Just wait until Nathan hears about this. This wasn't part of the agreement." "Agreement?" I spat, unable to hide my sarcasm. "I haven't agreed to any of your partner's bullshit. You can stay in the guest room, or you can leave. Maybe Reed's wife has a spot for you. His marital bed, perhaps." She glared at me, her eyes burning with fury, but she was silent now. She turned and stormed into the guest room, slamming the door behind her. I followed her up the stairs and stood outside the closed door. "By the way, what exactly was this so-called agreement?" "Want to explain?" I called, my voice low but simmering with contempt. "Nothing." 15 minutes later, I was downstairs, my phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. I grabbed it, and the words that greeted me made my blood run even colder. "What's this I hear? Cuck? You locked Leland out of her own room?" I thought I made myself clear. "Even someone like you should understand. Tonight, I'll overlook your little tantrum. Tomorrow, you'll cook Leland's favorite dinner and apologize. If you behave all week, maybe I'll allow you to spend time with her next weekend. Fail to comply and you'll see how serious I am. No questions. Clear?" I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. This guy was a fucking maniac. Cold, deluded, and completely out of touch with reality. Without a word, I took a screenshot and sent it to Victor. The reply came in 3 minutes. "Unbelievable. This guy thinks he's untouchable. But he's a fool. Keep the messages intact. Don't reply. Let him dig his own grave." Reed sent more texts after that, but I left them unread, my finger hovering over the delete button. Eventually, he stopped. I didn't see Leland again that evening. After locking my bedroom door, I ensured the surveillance system was still recording, then sent a message to my assistant, telling him I'd be coming in late the next day. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, so I waited until I was certain Leland had left the house in the morning before getting up and preparing for the day. As I made breakfast, I downloaded the previous night's recordings from the system. Leland hadn't even left the guest room until this morning. She had taken a quick shower in the guest bathroom, then left the house without eating anything. Strangely, she hadn't touched my computer at all. A small relief given my expectations. But the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. While finishing my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from Sylvia. "Hi, Ethan. Just confirming that the divorce papers will be served at 10:15 this morning. I've informed Victor as well. Try to have as good a day as possible, considering everything." I barely registered her words, a hollow feeling taking over. I forced myself to move, heading to the workshop. Once there, I double-checked that the surveillance system was still active, ensuring alerts would come straight to my phone if anything set it off. At 11 a.m., I met with an architect to finalize modifications for a client project. The meeting helped me keep my mind busy, but I couldn't shake the anticipation. I kept waiting for a call from Leland after she'd been served, but it never came. At 10:45, I texted Victor. "Leland hasn't called or messaged. I assume she's already talking to Reed. They're probably plotting something." Victor's response was quick and direct. "Definitely possible. I'll get Emily involved. Stay tuned." The meeting wrapped up, leaving me to focus on the work I actually enjoyed. I spent the afternoon cleaning tools and organizing my workshop, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. But then, at 3:12 p.m., my phone buzzed again with an alert. Starting, I texted Victor, my heart racing. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, and I immediately opened the live feed from the security system. The sight on the screen hit me like a punch to the chest. Leland, entering the house with an unfamiliar man at her side. They didn't waste time, heading straight to the home office. The man powered on my computer. The feeling of dread intensified as I watched him methodically bypass my password, his fingers moving quickly and purposefully. He inserted a flash drive into the computer and began a series of suspicious activities, his every move being captured by the surveillance cameras in crystal-clear detail. My blood ran cold as I saw Leland pacing around, packing her belongings into garbage bags. I knew her suitcases were still in the master bedroom closet, but this wasn't how I imagined it. Her desperation, the frantic packing. Once the man finished his work, he shut down the computer and exchanged a few words with Leland. They barely spoke, but I could see the tension in the way she looked at him. As he left, Leland finished packing, then walked out of the house at 3:56 p.m. I sat there, frozen, my eyes glued to the screen. My hands were trembling, but I couldn't look away. Shortly after the recording ended, my phone buzzed. Victor was calling. "All right, Ethan," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Go home and act as normal as possible. My guess is they'll try to involve the police either tonight or tomorrow. Be ready for a visit from an inspector. Warrants take a few hours, so it'll likely be tomorrow." A cold chill ran through me. "Is there a chance I'll be arrested?" I asked, my voice tight. "There's always a possibility," Victor admitted without hesitation. "If it happens, stay silent. Don't answer any questions. I've already contacted Stephen Parker, top-notch criminal defense lawyer. He's got all the relevant info, including your recordings. He says this will be the easiest case he's ever handled." Before we hung up, I gave Victor the access codes to my alarm system and surveillance recordings, just in case. The drive home was agonizing. My heart pounded as my anxiety climbed with each passing mile. When I finally got back, the evening passed uneventfully. No police visits, no calls from Leland, and, thankfully, no taunting messages from Reed. I made a sandwich, watched some TV, and fought the urge to tell my parents about everything. They wouldn't understand the intricacies of tampering with computer systems, cloud-stored evidence, and the mess I was in. I didn't want to burden them with any of it. The next day, while I was at the store, another security alert flashed on my phone. Someone had entered my house. I texted Victor immediately, my hands shaking as I accessed the surveillance system. This time, the intruders weren't just anyone. They were the police. They were trying to deactivate the alarm. Within minutes, the system went offline, signaling they had succeeded. Victor texted me, confirming he'd seen the activity and forwarded the images to Stephen Parker. An hour later, 2 officers arrived at my shop. No fanfare, no shouting. They handcuffed me, read me my rights, and shoved me into the back of a squad car. They started asking questions, but I remembered Victor's advice and stayed silent. At the station, they confiscated my phone and wallet before tossing me into a cell with 4 other detainees. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with silence. No one spoke, and everyone seemed more interested in the 4 grimy tiles on the floor than in each other. After about 3 hours, a guard came and escorted me to a meeting room. "What the hell?" I muttered, confused. I didn't request to see my lawyer yet. The guard didn't answer. He left me alone in the room, and for the longest time, the silence gnawed at my nerves. Then, 10 minutes later, the door opened, and Nathan Reed walked in, wearing that smirk that had haunted me for far too long. It stretched wide across his face like the Golden Gate Bridge, dripping with smug satisfaction. He sat down across from me, not saying a word, his silence suffocating as he tried to assert dominance. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, refusing to give him the satisfaction of any reaction. "So," he said, breaking the silence at last, "do you understand the gravity of your situation now?" I stayed silent. I asked you a question, Walker, he sneered. Answer me. I didn't. Answer me, you insignificant little bud, he spat, his voice rising, venom dripping from every word. Still, I refused to speak. It was his word against mine, and I wasn't about to give him the victory. Against mine, Reed continued, his voice dripping with smug confidence. A carpenter versus one of the most prominent lawyers in the city. Who do you think the court will believe? His smirk never wavered, but the venom in his words was undeniable. Well, it seems like you need some time to think this over, he said, standing up. Maybe a night back in your cell will help clarify things. Let's continue this chat tomorrow morning, shall we? With that, he left, and I was escorted back to the holding cell, the walls closing in just a little more. The cell was slightly less crowded now, but it didn't make it any more bearable. Later that afternoon, I was summoned again to the meeting room. As I entered, a tall, blond man with a stern, no-nonsense demeanor stood waiting. He looked like he meant business. Good afternoon, Ethan, he said, his tone polite but commanding. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Jonathan Lindsay. Please, just call me Jonathan. Victor reached out earlier today, but we couldn't get through. Given the situation, we suspected you might have been arrested and brought here. His calm professionalism helped ease some of the tension gnawing at my gut. I recounted everything. The unsettling visit from Nathan Reed, the threats, the manipulation. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he listened, his face betraying little emotion, but I could feel the weight of his focus. All right, he said when I finished. You'll appear before a judge tomorrow morning. Expect a hefty bail amount, but don't worry. Victor will handle it. I know spending a night here won't be easy, but stay strong. Both Victor and I are in your corner. In the meantime, continue refusing to answer any questions. I've officially taken on your case, and I'll make sure Reed doesn't get away with this. The next morning, I stood before the judge, maintaining my plea of not guilty to the absurd charge of possessing illegal materials. My heart hammered in my chest as bail was set at $25,000. I was released later that afternoon, though I was prohibited from leaving the city, contacting Leland, or reaching out to anyone from Reed's firm. At least I was allowed to return to my shop and resume work. The police handed back my phone and wallet, a hollow gesture of normalcy. Jonathan took me out for a late lunch to discuss the case in greater detail. We kept things vague at the station, Jonathan began, but after doing some digging, I've uncovered quite a bit about Nathan Reed. He paused, his gaze steady. Let me reassure you on a few things. First, the timeline's off. They brought you in before they even finished searching your house. That's irregular. Second, the fact that Reed was allowed to visit you, despite restrictions on your communications, suggests serious misconduct. This whole situation reeks of orchestration. And that's illegal. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. But what about Reed's influence over the judges? I asked. Jonathan's expression softened into a knowing smile. He's got friends, sure, but not all of them. You can't make that many allies without making a few enemies along the way, Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. Trust me, we'll find a way around his connections. I sighed, my mind racing. I have no idea what's waiting for me when I get home. I just hope Leland and her loving partner didn't clean me out. Jonathan gave me a reassuring look. Don't worry about that. Victor went to your house as soon as the police left, rearmed your system, and set it to record again. Nobody's been there since. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. After retrieving my car from the shop, I headed home, desperately needing a shower. On the way, I received a message from my architect confirming the approval of the updated plans. A small, welcome relief in the midst of all this chaos. When I finally arrived home, the sight was a punch to the gut. Every room had been turned upside down. The computer, of course, was the centerpiece of their investigation. But I knew they wouldn't find anything incriminating. I had made sure of that. As I cleaned up the mess, the weight of everything hit me all at once. I broke down. Tears, something I hadn't allowed myself to shed in years, finally came. Just a week ago, I was a man at peace, thinking I had a solid marriage. Now, I was a suspect in a fabricated crime, facing divorce, and being targeted by my wife's manipulative boss. How had it all unraveled so quickly? At least the media hadn't picked up the story. They seemed distracted by a brewing scandal over a multi-billion-dollar hole in public finances, sparing me from their scrutiny, for now. Later that week, Jonathan called with good news. "Ethan, all charges against you have been dropped. The inspector assigned to your case is known for being tough, especially when it comes to blackmail. He's unswayed by Reed's influence. He's filed charges against Nathan Reed for blackmail, evidence tampering, and possession of illegal materials. Leland is also being charged with conspiracy." I exhaled, the tension I'd been carrying for days finally beginning to lift. It was a small measure of justice, but it was something. Shortly after Jonathan's call, Victor reached out, inviting me to dinner that evening. On the way there, my family law attorney, Sylvia Grant, called. "Ethan," she began, her voice calm but sharp. "I have some news. Leland's lawyer contacted me this afternoon. She's ready to sign the divorce papers without requesting any changes. However, she has one condition. She wants a private 1-hour meeting with you. She suggested it take place in my office." The idea of seeing Leland again made my stomach turn, but I reasoned it could expedite the process. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "I want this over with as quickly as possible." That evening, with Victor and Sophia, was the first time in weeks I felt a fleeting sense of peace. Sophia had prepared a delicious meal of coconut shrimp and rice, and their company offered a welcome escape from the chaos. For a few hours, I allowed myself to forget it all, to feel grounded again. But when I returned home, the thought of the meeting with Leland hung over me like a shadow, reminding me that this was far from over. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Despite knowing I had done nothing wrong and was the victim of their twisted plot, I couldn't shake the nervous energy building inside me. Every step felt like a countdown, a prelude to something I couldn't control. When the day arrived, I was directed to Sylvia's office. She greeted me with her usual calm, but there was a caution in her eyes that matched the weight of the moment. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "I don't know what Leland intends to discuss, but I need to remind you, there are still criminal charges pending against her. Be careful. Be cautious." I nodded, steeling myself. Sylvia's voice took on an edge of warning. "Don't give her any ammunition. Avoid saying anything that could be twisted and used against you later. We can't search her for recording devices, so assume she might be recording the conversation. Keep that in mind." "Thanks for the heads up," I replied, the weight of her words sinking in. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't going to be easy. I was escorted to a small private meeting room, where Leland was already seated. As I walked in, I braced myself for the venomous, arrogant demeanor I had come to expect from her over the past weeks. But what I saw left me stunned. She was a shadow of the woman I had known, utterly broken, frail, as though every ounce of confidence had been drained from her. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but that quickly dissolved when memories of her shameless behavior with Reed resurfaced. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "What could you possibly have to say to me, Leland?" I asked, my tone cold, cutting through the air between us. "After everything you've done?" Her eyes welled up with tears. "Ethan, I'm so ashamed of myself and my actions toward you. You're an incredible husband, and you deserved none of this," she said, her voice breaking. "I let Nathan Reed manipulate me completely. When I heard the charges against you were dropped, and I realized I might face accusations myself, it jolted me out of his grip. I could barely look at myself in the mirror now. And all for what? A pitiful, meaningless affair." She broke down, tears falling freely as she sobbed. For the next half hour, she poured out her self-reflections, dissecting her behavior with a mixture of regret and self-loathing that seemed so raw, so unguarded. It almost felt impossible to believe. To my surprise, she didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to pry any information from me, didn't plead for my forgiveness. "I understand it's over between us," she said eventually, wiping her face with the back of her hand. If I were in your shoes, I'd want a divorce too. I don't blame you for ending it. I remained silent, watching her, numb to any emotion other than the sting of betrayal. I've already resigned from my job, she continued, her voice quieter now. I told Nathan Reed I never want to see or speak to him again. I've moved back to my parents' house and confessed everything to them. Let's just say they're not thrilled with me. She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. The atmosphere there is unbearable. I didn't respond. What could I say? She had brought all of this upon herself, and now she had to face the consequences. The next few months, years, maybe, are going to be difficult for me, she said, her voice faltering. I don't know what the future holds, but I hope that someday. She trailed off, her voice catching. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. She was broken, yes, but I couldn't forget what she had done. What Reed had done. All the lies, all the manipulation. It had shattered more than just our marriage. I didn't know her anything anymore. After everything is settled, we might be able to be friends, she said, her voice soft and tentative. That's a very distant possibility, Leland. Very distant, I replied coldly, standing to leave. Best of luck. As I exited the room, a small part of me still cared for her. But I knew that any thoughts of reconciliation were now a pipe dream. The damage had been done. The circumstances had already punished her more than I ever could. Revenge felt unnecessary. Life had already taught her a lesson she'd never forget. Leland ultimately cooperated with authorities, securing a plea deal by providing damning evidence against Reed. She relocated to another city, and we lost all contact. Meanwhile, Reed's misdeeds went public. 2 other individuals came forward with blackmail complaints, bolstering the case against him with overwhelming evidence, including recordings of his threats. Reed was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. I didn't even have to testify. After his conviction, I filed a civil suit against Reed and what remained of his firm. In the end, I won a $2 million settlement. A large portion of it went to Victor, a token of gratitude for his unwavering support. Though Victor protested at first, I insisted he accept it. His help had been invaluable. Life slowly began to improve. My business flourished, and I was in the process of acquiring a specialty door manufacturer. The new team of 6 employees felt like an extension of my family. Not long after my divorce was finalized, Victor and Sophia invited me to a barbecue. It was there that I met Sophia's younger sister, Grace. We hit it off immediately. After a few weeks of dating, I began to feel a spark of hope for the future. Weeks later, with the civil case behind me, I made the decision to visit Reed in prison. I instructed the guard to ensure Reed remained in the room for our chat. When he entered and saw me, his face contorted with anger. "What do you want, cook?" he spat. I didn't flinch. The guard blocked Reed's path, forcing him to sit. He sneered, his smirk returning. I leaned back in my chair, casually surveying him. "I just thought I'd check in," I said, my tone dripping with malice. "Heard your wife, Olivia, filed for divorce. Maybe I'll take her out for dinner sometime. Show her a good night." Reed's face turned a shade of crimson, his fury almost choking him. His mouth opened, likely ready to spit more threats, but he stopped. There was nothing he could say to regain the upper hand. "Relax, Reed," I said, grinning. "I didn't come here to talk about Olivia. I came to remind you of something." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "You're a fool, Reed. A spectacularly arrogant fool. Showing up at someone's door, thinking you can break them, only to end up in this miserable little cage. You're pathetic." His eyes burned with rage, but there was nothing he could do. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, his defeat settling in. "House and outlining your plans for blackmail? That's not just stupidity, Reed, it's amateur hour. A carpenter could outmaneuver you with half the effort," I said, my voice cold and cutting. Reed's fists clenched, his body trembling with rage. His eyes blazed, but I couldn't stop myself from bursting into laughter. "Weren't you the one who claimed that possessing certain materials was illegal for someone like me, but perfectly fine for someone as powerful as you?" I mocked, the words sharp and biting. Look at you now. That orange jumpsuit really does bring out your grandeur, doesn't it? Reed's face twisted into a mask of fury, the tremble in his hands betraying the barely contained breakdown building inside him. But I wasn't finished. Before I walked away, I leaned in, my voice low, deadly calm. Before I go, I have something Olivia and Leland thought you'd find enlightening. I slid a folded piece of paper across the table, watching as his hands shook even more as he unfolded it. What the hell is this? He spat, eyes narrowing in confusion. I pointed at the crude drawing on the page, the smirk never leaving my face. That, Reed, I said, savoring every word, is a diagram of female anatomy. Specifically, a part that men often overlook. You see, Olivia and Leland thought it was high time someone educated you on its location. Reed's face went from a deep crimson to a shade darker, the humiliation burning him alive as he realized what I had done. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was speechless, crushed under the weight of his own disgrace. I stood up, looking down at him one last time. The silence stretched for a moment, and then I walked out, laughing quietly to myself, the sound echoing in the room as I left him broken, speechless, and utterly defeated.